Item 2.1, we have a set of minutes from November 3rd. Your worship, seconder, Councillor Radwin, all in favor, signify with aye or hand. Contrary minded, carried. Item 3 is approval of the agenda. It's been circulated. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Her worship, Councillor Hickey, all in favor. Contrary minded, carried. Item number 4 is a disclosure of conflict of interest, if there are any. Not seeing any, we'll move on. Item 5, 5.1 is the consent agenda. Any questions for the consent agenda? If not, I will take a motion to forward a copy of the report to Common Council for approval or worship. A seconder, Councillor Norton, all in favor, aye. Contrary minded, carried. Business matters. Item 6.1, Finance Committee's first look at financial management. Over to CFO Fudge to kick us off. CFO Fudge.
Thank you very much, Chairman Sullivan, members of the Finance Committee. I'm very proud to introduce this next team to present an update to the Committee on Performance Management. This team is no stranger to leading the city through transformational change, whether it's implementing a continuous improvement program into the organization, whether it's supporting the city's 10-year strategic planning process, a significant undertaking leading the City Hall move into its new area, which was no small feat, to the trenches of supporting St. John and needing to come up with a sustainability plan. It's this team that we go to time and time again, all led by our Chief Information Officer, Stephanie Rackley-Roach, and her incredible team, Evelyn Hatfield, who's the Manager of Corporate Performance, Mark O'Hearn, who's our Performance Specialist, and Gord Jennings, who's our Performance Officer. Corporate performance management systems are critical for an organization to be able to link their goals and strategies to their plans and execution. It aligns an organization around its strategic priorities and places a focus on key performance indicators of a business. So with that, I'm very proud to introduce Stephanie to lead the committee through the presentation. Over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, Chair Sullivan and members of the Finance Committee. Since our last update to the Finance Committee in January 2022, the Corporate Performance team has completed work on the strategic plan and the 4 deliverables set out for 2022 on performance management. While the Corporate Performance team is providing guidance and developing a framework, process and tools and measures, the responsibility for performance management is organization-wide. Service areas have been responsive in their development of performance measures, data collection, and measurement. Performance management is a corporate tool that ensures continuous evaluation of what we are trying to accomplish in terms of defined results and making improvements as necessary using data. With the strategic plan in the process of being finalized in 2022, the focus for performance management was to align outcomes and measures with Council's priorities. The first deliverable was to establish at least 1 performance metric for each of Council's 23 objectives. Other deliverables included the development of dashboards, complete the pump proof of concept, and create tools and procedures to support performance management. Each of these deliverables have been achieved with some minor adjustments. This timeline illustrates the work completed to develop key performance indicators or KPIs and options for dashboarding to report on results. A KPI is a quantifiable measure of performance over time for a specific objective. KPIs provide targets for teams to shoot for, milestones to gauge progress, and insights that help people across the organization make better decisions. EY was engaged to support the corporate performance team in developing performance metrics. Virtual workshops were held with the senior leadership team and employees to come to agreement on the intended results for each objective and Council's priorities, how to best measure progress towards achieving the objective, and identify data requirements. The initial set of performance metrics were validated with the senior leadership team at the end of July 2022. Through the summer and fall, the corporate performance team has guided service areas in data collection and analysis with a view to developing requirements for a performance dashboard. The team has been looking at tools to efficiently share performance results. In total, 33 metrics were created and are included in the appendix to this presentation for your review. EY recommended reporting less strategic KPIs for initial performance reporting. The senior leadership team worked through a prioritization exercise to identify strategic KPIs. Objectives and actions being developed as part of the 10-year strategic plan were considered in narrowing down the KPIs to 12. In the second half of 2023, the dashboard will be scaled up to include other strategic metrics and operational metrics as appropriate. There is strong alignment between the 10-year strategic plan approved by Council on November 1st, 2022 and Council's priorities. Many of Council's priorities address one or more objectives or actions within the strategic plan. The next few slides will present the 12 strategic KPIs and the related strategic objectives for both the strategic plan and Council's priorities. Under Council's priority of grow, objectives and targets have been set for both population and property assessment. Percentage increase in population with a target of 2% by 2025. Council's priorities noted that this objective would be achieved by the end of Council's term. Percentage increase in property tax base. The measure for this has been slightly modified to reflect the total property tax base increase with a target of 3%. A second assessment metric has been established to measure new construction. Percentage increase in property tax base for new construction with a target of 1%. The next three measures relate to Council's priority of belong. The first two focus on measuring the progress on implementing neighborhood plans and the affordable housing plan. Initially, measurement of neighborhood planning implementation will focus on the Central Peninsula. Adjustments to the measure will be made as other neighborhood plans are completed in the future. The third measure focuses on heritage, arts, and culture and engagement, on heritage, arts, and culture and community engagement. A grant envelope is approved annually for these three areas. The KPI measures the percentage of the allocated funding expended in each grant envelope, an indicator of how engaged the community is in these areas. The target would be to fully expend the funded grant allocation. Oh, goodness. Sorry about that. The first metric on this slide also relates to Council's priority of belong. The metric relates to the progress in implementing district park improvement plans. At this point, we are monitoring this measure as work is still being done to finalize the Dominion Park Plan. As plans for other parks are completed, this measure will be adjusted. Two KPIs have been established for objectives related to sustainable transportation. The first one is percentage increase in usage of transit, cycling, and walking transportation with a target of 20%. Current measurement is based on census data. Tools to measure usages will be developed for more accurate and frequent approximations. The other measure relates to increase in capacity for walking and cycling. The KPI is the percentage increase of cycling and walking transportation infrastructure with a final target of adding 41 more kilometers combined. The first two metrics relate to Council's objective under the priority of perform. The first one is the percentage adherence to fiscal targets within the long-term financial plan. This KPI assesses the measures outlined in the long-term financial plan. The second one measures the percentage of customer requests completed within defined service levels, the target of 90%. With customer service requests are configured in the customer relationship management or CRM system with expected completion dates. The customer service team reports on these quarterly. With the customer service center into its second full year of operation, the team is working towards this target. The final metric relates to Council's priority of green. The KPI is the percent reduction of the city's corporate greenhouse gas emissions to 30% of 2015 levels by 2025 and become carbon neutral by 2050. The measure is the total of reductions in emissions from several areas, including streetlights, vehicle fleet, buildings, water and wastewater, and water management. The public will be able to access performance reports and a dashboard through the city's website. The corporate performance team is working with service areas to make some adjustments on the website to have a dedicated spot to find information related to performance. This slide shows the potential layout of the city's landing page on the website with the performance results in the purple box. A KPI dashboard displays key performance indicators in numbers or charts, allowing for quick, organized review and analysis. Modern KPI dashboards allow any user to easily explore the data behind the KPIs and uncover actionable insights. In this way, a KPI dashboard transforms data sets from across an organization into data-driven decisions that can improve service. The development of a dashboard requires both the metric and data to visualize performance. The corporate performance team is in the process of finalizing a statement of work with Esri to leverage our current agreement. Several municipalities are using this platform for reporting on performance, including Fredericton, Brampton, and Maple Ridge. The plan is to have a dynamic dashboard implemented by the end of the first quarter of 2023. In the interim, the corporate performance team, in consultation with service areas, is creating a 2022 performance report. This report is organized into 5 sections, one for each of Council's priorities. This approach was selected for the first report, given the deliverable to develop KPIs based on Council's priorities. This slide shows a sample in draft of the performance report for Council's GROW priority. On the right side of the graphic, related strategic KPIs are presented. Operational and supporting metrics have been included to provide some context to the KPIs as appropriate. On the left, more context has been provided on how the city is working to achieve objectives and meeting targets. It's expected that the report will be finalized, translated, and uploaded to the website on or around December 15th. Moving forward, the dashboard will focus on the goals and objectives in the 10-year strategic plan, ensuring the metrics align with continued progress on Council's priorities as appropriate. This slide illustrates a draft landing page. Users would click on one of the strategic goals to display related metrics. This example is one for the prosperous goal in the strategic plan. Users can see the current performance against a target and some past data. Users can click on one of the metrics to get more information, and this would include the factors that influence performance. Each KPI will show how a measure is trending in relation to its target, meeting, nearing, or needs improvement. For measures where data is currently being gathered, and those are for specific or long-term actions, a trend icon and or color of monitoring will be shown. This slide shows an example of what more detail could look like for a specific measure. This measure relates to adherence to the long-term financial plan, and in the top right, you can see the graphs presented to the Finance Committee as part of the operating budget. These are the metrics and targets that are included in the long-term financial plan and directly relate to the KPI. Users can also click on the graphic of the long-term financial plan for a read. A performance culture is a workplace where employees work to set standards and service levels, hold themselves accountable, and accomplish goals. In a performance culture, each employee understands their role in helping the organization meet its goals and maintain operations. Employees have a keen sense of the value they bring to the organization, working and operating with collaboration, open-mindedness, and creativity. Continuing to foster a culture of performance starts with leadership. The senior leadership team has been involved in creating the current set of metrics. This is their work, creating ownership for the intended results, measures, and adjustments where required. It is important for the leadership team to communicate formally and often as to why we measure performance to the respective teams. The focus is on their role and how they contribute to both achieving desired outcomes for the community as well as managing performance. This will include how operational KPIs and service levels support the achievement of strategic goals and objectives. The corporate performance team has developed tools and processes to support communication, development of meaningful measures, reporting on results, and adjusting as necessary for continuous improvement. These tools are based on the PUMP methodology. PUMP is a practical and collaborative performance measurement approach to develop KPIs that are meaningful and measure what matters. The finance team participated in a PUMP proof of concept in Q1 of 2022. Through a facilitated process, 2 measures were created for finance and 1 for supply chain management. This work was completed by both managers and employees working together. The exercise was useful in understanding how to best implement the PUMP methodology. It was determined to be a good tool for developing both operational and strategic metrics that align with our strategic plans. This slide shows the 8-step PUMP methodology. The proof of concept with finance covered the first 3 steps with the intention of implementing the remaining steps throughout 2023. Other service areas will be scheduled to work through the first 5 steps of this process, with workshops starting in January to create operational measures. The remaining 3 steps focus on continuous improvement through performance management, interpreting results, reporting, and improving processes as required to meet performance targets. Immediate next steps are to implement the dashboard, that dynamic dashboard, by end of Q1 in 2023 and establish operational metrics by the end of 2023. The corporate performance team will also be working on several actions in the 10-year strategic plan throughout 2023. It is recommended this presentation be received in file. I would be happy to answer any questions or receive comments.
Thanks very much for the presentation. To the committee, questions, comments for Ms. Rackley-Roach? Your worship, go ahead, and then Councillor Radwin, and then Councillor Hickey.
Thank you, Chair. Stephanie, I've worked with you on other of these sort of visionary, moving forward, measuring projects, and you've always done a great job. I find, like, when I read through that, like, the whole evolution of it is all there for me. It's you know, it's complex in a lot of ways, but it's also very straightforward. And what I do like about it is that it demonstrates, I guess, for all of us, that it's not just a job that everyone has, that you do have a role in moving, you know, the city forward and in the success of the city. And I think that's important for job satisfaction. And it's also, you know, important for us to be progressive and to get those things done that we want to do. So I'm really happy to see it, because we've talked about that, you know, and I know it's that these big projects don't happen overnight, and I know there's a lot of work in there, but it is nice to see it here. So I really want to thank you and your team for getting it organized for us. Thanks.
Thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Radwin.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, so Stephanie, you actually did answer my question that I had in your presentation. So that was great. Thanks for being so thorough. I did want to mention that I just love being able to see dashboards that have KPIs that matter and are linked to things so that we can actually see and, you know, from a high level, see how things are progressing, and the public to be able to see that as well. I don't know if it's possible, but I just thought I would throw it out there as food for thought. It would be nice if on the dashboard, the year-end goal would be there for when we're hoping to have something pushed through it as part of the strategic planning goals that we have. So if we're hoping to get something done by the end of 2024, it might be a good idea to have that out there so that if a member of the public is looking at it, that they don't have an expectation that's not reasonable, right? So if it's not going to happen until 2026, it would be nice to have that out there. So if they're not thinking, well, why isn't that getting done? You know, the clock's ticking, it's almost the end of 2023. Well, that's not the intention for some items. So that's just my food for thought, but I love it. And I think the dashboard's fabulous, and I can't wait to see it progress through the phases.
Thank you, Councillor Radwan, and for the suggestion. Definitely, we're in the phase where we can incorporate any suggestions that the committee or others may have in how we present this data and it's ultimately what the public wants to see, as well as what we need for decision making.
Councillor Hickey?
Not much more to add, Chair. Certainly commend Stephanie and your team. I think it's important that we continue to hold ourselves to those standards, as well as hold ourselves to data that allows us to be both competitive with other municipalities, but also hold ourselves to standards that others do as well. And I hope to see that eventually reflect members of Common Council as well to see that impact. So I think it's all good. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, see the hand up. Mr. City Manager, go ahead.
Mr. Sheriff, I could just offer a couple of concluding remarks on all of this. First of all, thank you for the patience of council. We have been looking at performance measurement or performance management for quite some time. Other higher priority items not so much got in our way, but needed to be dealt with first, such as the 10-year strategic plan, such as the articulation of council's priorities, catalytic projects, and the like. So thank you for the patience in allowing us the time to get here. We're going to require continued patience, not only from council, but from the public and our own staff as we move forward. Stephanie Rackley-Roach mentioned it during her presentation, and I've seen countless performance management systems fail. And the ones that fail normally fail because they don't have buy-in of the leadership and of the team. So we are taking a very deliberate process as we develop all this to ensure that we have the buy-in and the understanding of our team as we move forward, because it's only with that understanding that we get the necessary buy-in. Otherwise, it's just some gee whiz graphs that are up on a board somewhere and the culture has not changed. So it is an intentional and deliberate buy-in process. The other aspect is there will need to be a bit of patience in terms of the operational level metrics. Those two take time to develop and make sure that they're not all just lagging indicators, things we already know. We need leading indicators, but also indicators that actually indicate something. And the overly simplistic example I use is the number of fire calls within a fire department may be interesting enough in and of its own. Has it gone down or has it gone up? But it really tells you nothing in terms of your operational delivery of an effective fire service. But if you drill down and think just a little bit longer on what the operational metrics might be, then I think you can get to metrics that actually mean something and hopefully are indicative of the future and not just telling the history of the past. So that will take some deliberate time and effort over the coming months and up to the end of next year to get all of that in place. But the strategic KPIs are, for all intent and purpose, done at this point. And Stephanie Rackley-Roach explained how we will present those. And that is the necessary first step from which we will draw all the operational KPIs at this point in time. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. City Manager. Fantastic amount of work as we continue to work on the business while we're working in the business. I think this is going to be a great step forward, another great step forward for us corporately. And certainly we've got to start at the council and top level and get those KPIs. I'm looking forward to the continued work as we start to drill down and get more operational. Thanks very much. I think the motion for this is receive and file. Your worship, Councillor Radwan, on the question, all in favor? Aye. Contrary minded? Carried. Thanks very much. Cool stuff. Item 6.2 is the proposed general fund operating budget. CFO Fudge.
Thank you, Chairman Sullivan, members of the Finance Committee. Before you this evening is staff's recommended 2023 general operating budget. The budget was before the Finance Committee on November 3rd as a receive and file, subject to further feedback from the committee and members of council through the committee chair. We did hear feedback over the last 3 weeks that there is a desire to have funds available for community-focused service opportunities that may not yet have fully formed strategies, but for which there is a high likelihood that one-time funding will be required in 2023 as staff work progresses. Based on this feedback, we have made 2 adjustments to the operating budget from the version you've seen the last time on November 3rd that we're recommending this afternoon. So before I get into those adjustments, the recommended 2023 general operating budget is $177,287,500. That is up 7.6% year over year from 2022, or $12.6 million in increased annual investment in the community, with 80% of this budget being funded by property tax revenue. The recommended property tax rate is $1.62 per $100 of assessed value, along with a recommendation to increase both the non-residential multiplier and the heavy industrial multiplier from 1.5 to 1.7. Even with the 9-cent tax rate reduction year over year, property tax revenue in St. John will increase 8.1% year over year from 2022, moving in the budget from $131.5 million in property tax revenue collected in 2022 to $142.1 million in property tax revenue collected in 2023. The 2 notable changes I referenced earlier before you this afternoon. First, we are recommending bringing in a $800,000 new fund called the Community Services Operating Reserve. That was the first adjustment to the budget. You'll see that in the revenue and in the expenses. In addition to that operating reserve, we've also included a small adjustment to the community grant envelope based on some feedback we received over the last few weeks, for a desire for the city to have a little more funding available to community organizations with outcomes that strategically align with the city's objectives pursuant to the city's new grant policy that was recommended by this Finance Committee. So with respect to the Community Services Operating Reserve, $800,000 operating reserve will require a policy to be created by the Growth Committee, and it will be the Growth Committee's recommendations and responsibilities to make those recommendations to Common Council for the use of the funds. And these would be one-time uses for funds in accordance with the reserve policy. So some examples for which the Growth Committee may make recommendations are on the slide. Some examples are the Affordable Housing Action Plan, a one-time investment to accelerate, for example, the Municipal Housing Entity review. You could look at one-time blitzes in programs such as dangerous buildings or minimum standards. You could look at improving community services as a one-time investment for 2023. One-time top-up of social programs that are or funding agreements in the budget. So again, the policy will be created by the Growth Committee, with oversight by the Growth Committee and responsibility to make those recommendations to Common Council. This is the high-level snapshot of the 2023 recommended general operating budget compared to 2022. We reviewed the slide at the last Finance Committee meeting, so I will not revisit it other than to point out the additional $800,000 I just referenced. And under revenue, it's called Transfer from Operating Reserve. That is the Community Services Operating Reserve, now presented under revenue. We again recommend this afternoon proceeding with caution when it comes to ramping up government expenditure levels in the organization, as we need to ensure growth is sustainable over the long term. To prevent being in another predicament of needing to restructure the organization due to expenditure growth exceeding revenue growth over the long term. The 2023 general operating budget is 7.6% higher than 2022 and 12.7% higher than it was in 2021. Whereas if you compare the budget growth between 2013 all the way to 2021, that entire 8-year period, the budget grew 6.4%. So it's a significant amount of expenditure growth over a very short amount of time. And we're able to reduce the tax rate and increase the service levels in budget 2023 due to the high tax base growth that we've achieved of 8.76%. And as we have pointed out in the past, growth over 3% allows the city to look at managed service level enhancements and reductions to the tax rate, as well as it drives our offers for affordable wage packages in the budget. We are in a volatile economy currently, and we have been at this exact same point in the past in 2009, after which the city experienced declining tax-based growth after record growth, to the point of having stagnant growth between the years 2014 and 2021. Over that period, averaging 0.5% growth in a 5-year period, again causing structural deficits and the need to rely on short-term provincial assistance during that period. The revised long-term financial plan and the annual budgets need to be resilient to support the city's fiscal health for budgets today as well as for budgets tomorrow. This is a slide I included this afternoon with respect to the need to being cautious, increasing spending year over year due to some indicators economically and some fiscal factors that will place budget pressure on the city's budget in the future. You see in the table above and on the slide, look at the changes in inflation rate from 2008, 2019, 2020, all around anywhere between 0 and 2% for those 3 years. Then the pandemic hits in 2021, starting in April. It creeps up from 3.4%, and we're currently at 6.9% in October. Inflation rates have a significant impact on the city's budgets, like they do all organizations when it comes to inflation in goods and services, fuel, asphalt. We need to keep our eye on that economic indicator. Another indicator for us, if you see the red boxes below the table, the city's debenture rate. In 2021, our average yield on debt debentures was 2.28%. Given the rise in interest rates, our most current yield on debenture is 4.44%, almost doubling. The next red box is the fact that, we'll talk about this in the next slide, direct core funding and equalization funding for the city. We expect that amount will drop by approximately $3.4 million due to the change in the equalization program by 2027. And as we've seen in the media lately, the Canadian Real Estate Association has advised or have assessed that property sales are declining in St. John as they are elsewhere in the province and across Canada. Approximately 30% year-over-year decline in property sales as of October in St. John. And over the last 5 years, approximately 15% lower than it has been over the last 5-year average. And also, as we discussed before, some analysts, including I have RBC as an example here, are forecasting a recession in early 2023. So all these indicators mean we need to really take a cautious approach with respect to building our expenditures in our annual operating budget. So this is the, the comparison of the province's equalization formula, the new formula compared to what we had before. You'll notice on the bottom portion of the slide, we estimate in 2027, the core funding equalization funding that we've received directly will be eliminated. And the one-time RSC grant that we received in 2023 will also be eliminated. That's the $3.4 million reduction in direct funding, equalization funding that I just referenced. So notwithstanding the economic challenges, the recommended 2023 general operating budget includes significant service enhancements and a lot of good news stories for the community compared to what we had in 2022. I'm going to walk through each of these on the next 3 slides, and I think they merit taking our time walking through them. So first and foremost, there are no service reductions in this budget in 2023. There's also a $3 million recreation facility capital reserve that's been put into the budget. So this is the catalytic project for the recreation and arts catalytic facility. That's in the budget, fully funded. We talked about the $800,000 community services operating reserve that's in the budget. We also have 5 new casual positions to cut grass and mow medians and beautify the city. In addition to 6 additional casuals, look after funding key beautification in that area and other areas of the city. St. John Transit subsidy is increasing 7%, worth approximately $360,000 year over year. There's funding for significant plans, priorities of council, so full funding for the North End Neighborhood Plan, as well as funding for the City Market Strategic Plan. There's also a contract position in the budget to support affordable housing in implementation of the action plan, as well as increased budgets in goods and services for affordable housing. There's funding for 5 new recreational programs in this budget compared to last year, including the cost of 2 all-terrain wheelchairs and reinstatement of the Passport to Parks program. There's also a 27% increase in community grants that we talked about earlier. There's additional staffing in the budget for community services, including 2 full-time equivalent positions to support recreation, community development, and social inclusion. There's additional temporary staffing to support enhanced recreational programming, including playground supervisors, special event summer support staff. There's funding to support a 10-year human resource strategy and employee performance system, as well as a recreation subsidization review and a parking study, which is long overdue. There's also funding for the development of the Community Energy Action Plan and funding to support civic commemoration and abilities advisory committees. In addition, there's new full-time resources to increase ability to support traffic enhancement, active transportation, as well as design and construction management of those capital projects. There's additional temporary staffing to support the City Market Strategic Plan and Night Market. There's continued important investments in IT security and infrastructure with respect to the public safety records management system. There's funding for an employee recognition program. Also, enhancement to the internal audit service. There's a new internal audit risk management position in the budget. There's professional development funds for mayor and council, and there's funding for urban stormwater outfall inspections. Now, the next few slides I have to admit, we stole the next few slides from the City of Moncton because we thought it was a good reminder to local governments undertaking the budget process what services each level of government is responsible for to citizens. So federal government, responsible for programs such as senior programs, poverty reduction, employment programs, funding healthcare, citizen and immigration, criminal law, family policies. Provincial government, responsible for education, healthcare, highways, income assistance, subsidized housing, nursing homes, tourism. And then there's the municipal level of government, where we are responsible for funding roads, and police, public safety, fire and police, drinking water services, public transit, land use, zoning, recreation, solid waste, compost, recycling. This is important because cities cannot afford to be downloaded responsibilities that are federal and provincial responsibilities because the taxation policy does not support it. Out of every $1 of taxation, 8 cents is received by municipal governments, while 92 cents are received by federal and provincial governments. Cities are also challenged enough to fund core priorities, given 60% of public infrastructure that support the economy and quality of life in the community are municipally funded infrastructure. Subsidized housing is a provincial responsibility. However, the City of St. John is an important stakeholder, and the city has developed an affordable housing action plan. We wanted to bring to the Finance Committee's attention funds currently available to support the Affordable Housing Action Plan. There's approximately $2.4 million in this budget that's available. So I'll just go through line by line. First of all, the 2022 budget, we did have $1.1 million federal RDC grant provided for affordable housing. That's available. We also had in the 2022 general operating budget a municipal contribution of $300,000. We had some contributions from PEDAL and CANF for a combination of $100,000. We also are introducing this afternoon the Community Services Fund, not to say that will all be used for affordable housing, but it certainly is available for one-time investments under the service stream, as well as the 2023 proposed budget, operating budget. There's $105,719 in the budget to support an affordable housing facilitator and some consulting services. Spent to date primarily has been on the Affordable Housing Action Plan. But it was important for the Finance Committee to understand total funding envelope available with respect to this service. Before you on this slide are the approved or proposed property tax rates for the cities we typically benchmark ourselves to. So this afternoon, we are recommending a 9-cent rate reduction to $1.62 and a 1.7 multiplier. Two other urban cities, Moncton has set a tax rate of $1.44. That's down 10 cents. But they have opted with a multiplier of 1.61. All other municipalities went with 1.7. Fredericton has a tax rate of $1.3386, while in our region, the city's tax rate is still significantly higher than Rothesay, Quispamsis, and Grand Bay Westfield. So when we talk about competitive advantage, assuming a new build, so new construction in a community, and taking the example of $50 million development. So with new construction in a community, regardless of community, regardless of challenges of differences in assessment, all these communities have common challenges when it comes to supply chain, labor market, interest rates, inflation. They're all economic factors that affect all communities. With the $1.62 tax rate and a $50 million tax-based development, it would cost a developer $810,000 per year in St. John for residential property taxes, which equate to over 20 years, $16.2 million. If you compare that to the tax rates in other communities, the developer will pay anywhere between $1.7 million to $4.3 million less in property taxes over a 20-year period to construct in one of the benchmark cities on the slide. Although St. John has many competitive advantages to attract development, the tax rate is still a competitive disadvantage, including the tax rate reduction that we've done this year. Sorry, even after incorporating the tax rate reduction we have proposed this year. And on new development or new construction, St. John is significantly underperforming both Fredericton and Moncton, as well as the provincial average as it relates to new construction tax base. Fredericton experienced $167 million in new construction tax base. Moncton experienced $294 million in new construction tax base, and St. John experienced $96 million. That's 1.35% for St. John, compared to 3.31% for Moncton, 2.04% in Fredericton, and the provincial average is 2.2%. We discussed at our last meeting that the recommendation to increase the multiplier to 1.7 is premised on entering the $6.7 million tax room vacated by the province. We can enter this tax room, and the non-residential customer and the heavy industrial customer will still pay less taxes overall than the previous year due to the provincial property tax rate reduction. And this is why the municipal tax rate with the updated multiplier will increase for non-residential properties approximately 19 cents. You can see that on the first column. With the provincial tax rate reduction, the provincial property tax rate will be reduced 33 cents. So when you combine the two overall, it's a 14.1 cent reduction for non-residential property owners. Now the question of what would be required of the city to enter into all the provincial tax room? Two things would have to happen. First, and preferably, the city would need a multiplier of 1.7875 in order to enter into that property tax room. As you are aware, the maximum multiplier legislatively we're able to enter or to set is 1.7. Alternatively, if the city was to have set a tax rate of 1.703, that would allow the city to enter into 100% of the provincial tax room vacated. Based on the proposed tax rate of $1.62, residential property tax revenue is increasing 6.32% year over year, compared to 11.09% and 10.25% increases for non-residential and heavy industrial property owners. Due to the 33% reduction, those costs will be offset for the heavy industrial and non-residential property owners. If we were to set the municipal tax rate to 1.703 to access all the provincial tax room, it would be on the backs of the residential customers, as you can see on the next slide, as well as it would put the city on a unsustainable expenditure level of risk. So I know this is a busy slide, but entering 100% of the provincial tax room at $1.703, you'll see the top part of the slide, which is the table we just looked at, 6.32% increase in tax revenue for the residential property owner. Customer class, sorry, I apologize. That would currently we're generating approximately $5.1 million more in residential property tax revenue. If we increase the tax rate to $1.703 to maximize the provincial tax room, the residential property class would pay $9.5 million. So we go from $5.1 million to $9.5 million. The proportional share of the taxes would go from 48% to 53%. And overall, property taxes in the community would go from 6.32% increase in residential property taxes to almost 12% increase in residential property taxes. And overall, all collection of all property tax revenue would increase to 13.62%, and the city would generate almost $18 million more in one single year of property tax revenue. We believe that that would create an unsustainable level of increase in expenditures for the city of St. John. So as I wrap up, we discussed service enhancements, we discussed tax burden, we discussed government responsibility, but I don't want to lose sight on the fact that this budget recommendation is also very fiscally responsible. Don't spend more money than you make. The 2023 recommended budget is structurally balanced. Borrow wisely, this budget reduces debt by increasing pay-as-you-go in line with the debt management plan. Save your money for a rainy day. This budget includes almost $4 million in additional reserve funding. Save first versus spend first. And take control of your expenditures before they take control of you. This budget adheres to the city's financial policies and including the wage escalation policy. And we can prove it with performance indicators monitored, tracked, and transparently reported to the community in the long-term financial plan. So with that, I'll read the recommendation. It is recommended that the Finance Committee approve the proposed 2023 General Fund operating budget and forward to the next meeting of Common Council for receive and file, and endorse the following. Resolved that the sum of $177,287,500 be the total operating budget of the City of St. John for 2023, that the sum of $142,105,410 be the warrant of the City of St. John for 2023, that the tax rate for the City of St. John be set at $1.62, that the City of St. John set the property tax rate for heavy industrial class at 1.7 times the residential rate, that the City of St. John set the property tax rate for the non-residential class at 1.7 times the residential rate, and that the wage escalation policy apply to the management professional group. And with that, I'd be pleased to take any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thanks, CFO Fudge. Just for process for committee, we'll do questions for staff on what's proposed. Then I will entertain a motion, and then we can debate the motion. So first, we'll just questions for staff. Councillor Hickey, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chair. Through you to Commissioner Fudge. Well, congratulations, Kevin, on this. It seems to have come together well, and I think is representative of a lot of the plans and work that we've done in leading up to a budget like this. It's refreshing to be able to talk about where we're spending the money instead of where we're cutting it around this table, and I think it's a testament to both the increase in growth we're seeing, but also this council's ability and past ability to stick to our long-term financial plan. I guess I'm just asking for a quick history lesson here. 2009. I hope we're not creeping up to economic realities that may reflect that past. But what exactly happened that saw the growth rate drop like that? The city seemed like it wasn't ready for it at the time, caught us off guard. How are we prepared for that in reflection of this budget as well, and moving forward beyond maybe what may come?
Yeah, and I don't have the entire history of economics from 2009, but I mean, a few things that pop into my mind. One, I think we had a housing boom around 2007, 2008, and then there was a subprime mortgage crisis that resulted beyond that really caused property values to decline significantly, and that had a global impact, certainly North American impact. There was also, there was talk of a second refinery in St. John at the time, and a lot of infrastructure was constructed around potentially having a second refinery, and we know that didn't come to fruition. But I think we're different now, and obviously there's all kinds of global economic factors that take place in any given time frame. But I think where we're at now, we got the foresight of having long-term planning. I don't think the city had 10-year financial plans and long-term foresight back then, and it was really, times were great. It was 9%. Let's take that opportunity and let's do things with it, with really understanding what was happening down the road. And I think we've lived through it. Not only do we have the academic support and best practices and financial policies, but we've all lived through it. We've all sat around in boardrooms and talked about hoppers and cuts and restructuring, and we felt that. So I think learning from the past, and I think that's really why a lot of our cautionary tale in our budget presentation is, we really need to make sure that we're sustainable now and in the future. But saying that, we're making significant investments in this budget. Going from 166 million to 177 million is a significant investment in the community. So we feel pretty comfortable with the recommendation this afternoon.
I guess on that point, just one last question. With the adjustment in the community services reserve, where did that 800,000 come from exactly in order to not see that rate change in tax?
Yeah, so what we're suggesting is to be transferring that from our operating reserve. We had maximum operating reserves pursuant to legislation, but one of the things that you'll see later when Mr. Levine presents is we had anticipated drawing 2.2 or 2.3 million in the 2022 general operating budget for COVID relief, from Safe Restart funds and various other funding. We're doing a little bit better than that in the year-end forecast. I think Craig will present later. I think it's around 1.7 we're recommending drawing in. So there is some capacity there, and we're suggesting that we would transfer within the operating reserve because of that capacity, as well as we do have the ability to do it. And we do have lots of policies and procedures around governing the use of that reserve, and it ultimately will be council's resolution decision on how that reserve gets used.
Great, thanks very much. I do have another question, Chair, but I can pass. I don't know if other members of the committee have other questions or.
Go ahead, Councillor Hickey.
Okay. I just asked specific to, I guess, with a bit of my public safety hat on. I'm just hoping and I know that some of this was discussed at our last council meeting, but I did miss it, so I do have a couple questions if that's okay. With the increases to public safety, I was just hoping to get a brief breakdown on any service adjustments that would change from both chiefs, if that's okay.
Fair question, chiefs.
Like we're seeing about a 12% adjustment in police and about 4% in fire.
Chief Clifford, go ahead.
Good evening, through you, Mr. Chairperson, to the councillor, the committee member. We don't anticipate any negative service adjustment. The majority of the increase, the 4% from last year, was based on the award that was provided through the collective agreement process. That we had made some allowances through budget at the end of 2021 and midstream 2022. There was allowances made for potential settlements, and then there's that 4% adjustment to sustain to accommodate and work with the agreed upon wages. They're within the wage escalation policy. And so we are on path to provide the same level of service through the sustainability plan that we crafted probably 2 years ago now, that when we closed the Milledgeville station.
Great
Thanks,
to hear,
Chief.
Chief. Thank you.
Chief Bruce, I see you on the line, or would you like to address service
Yep,
changes?
thank you.
please?
Yeah, there won't be any decrease to service with respect to policing. Most of the budget, I think it's the same as far as the negotiated settlement, like Chief Clifford has, built in wage escalation policy, so that's done. The other stuff is all infrastructure that's related to the cyber attack and some significantly outdated infrastructure here in the police department as far as IT and things like that. So you won't see any service reduction with respect to the police.
But Chief, the main part where you're seeing those, I mean, we're talking about like $2 million in increases. It's mostly salaried increases and then some of that infrastructure adjustment as well.
Right, so you have basically the way it is, you'll have the increase is less than almost $700,000 in infrastructure, and the rest is wages and benefits based on the collective agreement.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Chief.
That's it
Thanks,
for me,
Chief
Chair.
Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other members of committee with questions? Oh, Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Chair. Just to Councillor Hickey's question, I think it's fair to not to speak for the chief here. I think some of the efficiencies that we're going to see as it relates to infrastructure, whether it's looking at online crime reporting, setting up the infrastructure for that, some of the other outdated modalities that the police department's currently working with are going to increase some of the efficiencies. So there's going to be enhancements in terms of how first responders specifically within the police department do their job. So I think I don't want that to be overlooked. And Chief Bruce, I certainly don't want to step on your toes, but I think it's fair to say that some of those enhancements as it relates to our technological capacity within the force and updating our IT infrastructure and even things within Public Safety Communication Center are going to improve in how we do business, whether it's response time or reducing duplication or some of the redundancies that we currently have in there. I don't know if that's fair to say, but it seems to me like some of those updates are going to bolster how we do things.
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor Norton. So a lot of what the infrastructure is going to do is create efficiencies in the department, right? So whether it's like you said, the online reporting, or the fact that we'll be able to put more members on the street with the new RMS system that's coming in out of the dark ages as far as reporting. And then we'll have a better idea when we're doing analytics and statistical reporting as well. Right now, we don't have that capacity, so we also do that. Another piece of that would interest the city, if they could get a negotiation with the provinces, that with the new RMS system will also include e-ticketing, which right now you wouldn't benefit from the city from that. However, that's another piece. If we have right now, that's not an option. But if once that comes into place, that is an option for the city to lobby the provincial government for funds on that as well. So there are significant savings with a little bit of money spent and on efficiency for sure. Thank you, Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Chief.
Does that work for you, Councillor Hickey?
Yeah, great. I appreciate the follow-up. Yeah, no, great explanation. Thanks to Councillor Norton and to the chief as well.
Super. Councillor Radwin, I just want to check in with you. It's my.
She's having connection difficulties. She's in the office next to me, so.
Okay.
I may get her to, if she can't connect, I may get her to just ask her questions here.
Well, we'll give her a moment. It is my regular computer time to stop in the middle of a meeting, so I've switched over electronic devices, and just to add to it, my city computers decided it's a good time to update. So I have more limited function. I guess I'll add a few comments and ask a question, perhaps. Just to add to the answer to your question, Councillor Hickey, with regards to 2009, significant changes in how we now do business. We follow plans. It sounds simple, but in that time frame of 2009, the budget process was management would bring a budget and council would sit in a room for a weekend and decide what they liked and what they didn't like, and add and subtract and hammer out a budget. I can tell you with a little bit of embarrassment, back then council didn't refer to plans necessarily at the time, and we were often accused of spending money, time on plans, and then plans sitting on the shelf, which is a significant contrast to where we are now, where our staff spends weeks and months integrating all of the plans we have working, whether it be Move SJ, Play SJ, Plan SJ, our strategic plan, our long-term financial plan, and I am sure more plans, time, expert time. That is also involved because all of those plans have community consultation as well. So, it takes months and sometimes years to put good, solid plans together. So the fact that we are now in 2022 creating the 2023 budget, integrating all those plans along with our assessment results, it is night and day, 2009 to 2022. So I hope that gives you a little bit of clarity. I do have a question for staff, and I don't know who wants to handle this one first. But gosh, every time CFO Fudge, you moved another page. Number one was no service reductions, and then numbers 2 through 25, I think it went to 25, were all additions and additions and additions, and certainly significant additions to what we're doing. I think it's important. Most of those, I don't think there were any additions to the establishment, maybe 1 or 2, but most of it was targeted at one-time contracted positions. Important to recognize that the increases we're getting in assessment may not be sustainable. Certainly we're seeing them everywhere and hasn't proven to be sustainable. So I think it's prudent that they be one-time funds while a pattern establishes itself. I guess my question is this. There's a lot that we're adding on. Do we have the operational capacity to add all of that? Starting next year, there's a lot.
I see the city manager's hands up, so maybe I'll let him take a crack at that one.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, it's a great question. So at the next council meeting, I will be providing an update on where we sit on Work Plan 2022, which was, as council will recall, very ambitious, and we knew that there would probably be some slippage into 2023. That will all be explained. We have begun preliminary stages on Work Plan 2023. Commissioner, soon to be City Manager Brett McGovern will put that before council once that is developed, to give you an idea. And we will have to once again triage the work so that it makes sense and that we have a reasonable possibility of achieving what is within the budget. It's actually one of the reasons why some of the ideas and initiatives that have been floated around in various social media posts and various other inquiries are not in the budget, because there is a capacity limit, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of time and people. And we have a strategic plan now for the next 10 years that lays out when various things can realistically be programmed. And we are trying to stick to that strategic plan. So the short answer to your question is what you see here this evening, yes, we believe is achievable, but what you're hinting at is absolutely true. Even if we were to throw more money at the budget, it's questionable whether we could actually effectively spend it. On your point about no increase to the staff, I just feel obliged to make sure the public record is correct. There are actually 3 deliberate increases to the managerial staff within this budget. One is the increased person in audit and the internal audit function. We have seen the benefit of making sure that we have a robust internal audit capability. And the other 2 are based on previous resolutions of council to do more in the community services, social inclusion, recreational programming areas, and therefore increased personnel were required there. So there are 3 staff increases. I'm sorry, there's a 4th, and that is the new engineer that will be focused on active transportation and all of the initiatives there. I think those are the totality of the 4, which was the first part of your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, staff. Councillor Radlin, you go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I was having connection problems. I do have a question for you to Chief Bruce, actually, a couple of questions. So I'm feeling a little bit challenged because we are at arm's length having a commission that we're just not, you know, I guess there's just some information I'm just not sure about, and it's hard. It makes it difficult to make an educated decision when it comes to budgeting. So my question to you is, I'm just wondering if you can kind of give us an idea of like the 3 biggest challenges that the police department is having right now. And I'm also kind of wondering what sort of things you've implemented from the Ernst & Young report. For example, I know one of the recommendations was civilian officers. So just wondering if you can kind of give me an update about those couple items.
Okay, let me see how I can do for you. So the civilianization is basically we look at every position as we go through the organization to see if it's police required to do the position or if it's in fact a civilian. So if you look at initially, one of the bigger ones that we had, we changed our training manager from a uniform member to a civilian member. Now that can be counterproductive too, because now we lose a training person that's not going to be able to do training. So that's not as cost effective as it sounds or as it looks on paper. With a body worn camera coordinator was supposed to initially budgeted for a uniform member, which it's a civilian member because we don't need a uniform member to do the redaction. So that's substantially cheaper when you're not paying somebody that is supposed to be out on the street doing police work and they're in an office just with redaction software and coordinating that. So every position we look at, and in 2023, we have an operational staffing review on. So Deputy Dwyer is going to be heading that up, and we're just putting that in place now. So we're going to try to look at, the analytics of it, what the workload analysis, where we need people, where we don't. And so we've had a number of, since I got here, what we would call efficiency reviews that we call them. One of them was, for instance, we sat down and we did an efficiency review of fleet. So we reduced our fleet but with a significant number. So where do you see that? Okay, well, right away, those are vehicles that will not be replaced, right? That's insurance we're not going to pay. That's fuel that we're not going to pay. So while you kind of see, well, there's an increase in fuel, it could be that much more if we had all those vehicles. So those efficiency reviews we're doing. So those are the kind of efficiency reviews that have been conducted as well to try to see what it is we can do. So as far as Ernst & Young, that's kind of where we are with respect to that. The challenges that we face in policing are the significant demands that the public has of our resources, right? So we're trying to work within what we have. So one of the bigger issues that we have is the number of people that we have on various types of leaves, right? So we're addressing that with Dallas Mercer, a consultant company, to see how we can maximize our efforts with respect to back to work strategies. We are looking at different ways with, for instance, the alternative response unit. So instead of sending an officer out to a location to take a report that should or could be handled on the phone, is being handled on the phone. So I think we're up to over 4,000 calls for service that we haven't had to send a member to because it's not required to send a member. The online reporting should be ready shortly. There's always, so anytime that we are putting anything online in place, as you know, it has to be bilingual, and that creates significant backlog in putting that on, because not every company that you get, and our online reporting company that won the tender was from the US, so they don't automatically have, bilingual capacity. So that has to be built. But when that comes online, we've just trained a bunch of people in that. That will reduce the number of members that have to actually go out to a call, which means that we can focus our members on doing proper investigations, spending more time in the community where the community is demanding us to be. So those are some of the issues that we face. Mostly it's the demands on what people expect of us. The other demands we're finding significantly are in the court system. So there's a lot more work being done with disclosure. There's a lot more work being done with remands. The technical side of policing will never be ahead of the technology. So right now in the province, we can't. So for instance, if we seize phones on an investigation, we have to download those phones. That comes with evidence issues in court. And so right now the RCMP is the only game in town with respect to that. Right now they're only doing child exploitation. So the chiefs of police are working together right now to do more collaboration together and buying some software and integrating our departments together so that we can each, share the kind of the pain on that, because the Mounties, they just can't do it. So I would say biggest challenges, of course, are the number of people that we have on different leaves that we have to address, which challenges our resources. We have a significantly restrictive contract. So what we can or cannot do to move resources around, that creates issues for us as well. And technology, obviously, this budget, we really focused on what we need to come into the year 1990. And so that's where we are with our technology, how bad and how outdated it was with respect to our RMS and our new CAD system that we need just to keep up with the province. That doesn't really put us ahead of anywhere, but those are the challenges that we face. So with respect to, we've done a lot of efficiency reviews to try to manage that. But again, so we do an efficiency review, for instance, and we see, okay, yes, we need a body-worn camera coordinator to do the redaction. We bought some redaction software, but that's significant workload for people to, when we do so if we're involved in a court case, when a body-worn camera is utilized, all that entire incident needs to be redacted. So license plates, people's faces, everybody that's not involved in the incident, so that it can go over to court. So the court demands are getting larger, and that's taking more resources from us. So if you look at where we are with violent crime in the city, that takes more resources. The investigative piece of that, the production orders that you have to get, search warrants that you have to get. So that takes a lot of time and resources. And so we're trying to juggle what we have, where we are. And I think that staffing review that we have for 2023 will really kind of expose where we need more, where we can be efficient in other areas, and where we can move forward on. And so I don't know, does that help you at all?
It helps me a bit, Chief Bruce. I appreciate that. I mean, I guess I don't know if you're able to give me specifics on if you have hired more officers, or how many would be civilian, how many people are sitting home taking full pay and on some sort of leave. I'm curious as to what kind of challenges you're having. I mean, it's an extra 2.4 million in your budget, and it's hard not kind of knowing these details on a month-to-month basis. I totally appreciate the commission. It's not that. They're working hard and we've got some good people there, but the buck stops at council. So I just want to be able to make sure that I'm making a good educated decision. And that's all.
Yeah, so there was a couple things in there. One, is this, Chair, is this a public forum here?
Yep.
This is a public meeting, yes.
Yeah. So we do have numbers, but I won't make them public about the number of people that we have on specific leaves on that. But that's a challenge for anybody, right? If you have some of your workforce that's not coming to work, but we try to utilize those as much as we can. Sorry, I might have missed the other piece of that.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering did you hire more officers? How many?
No, so we have our FTE window. And so basically it's through attrition. We haven't hired any on top of what we have been authorized for. Now, that's not to say that once we finish this the operational staffing review that we're not going to, need more. But right now we're hiring through attrition, whether we have people leaving as a result of retirements or whether they've gone on a long-term sick leave. So we would replace those. But there hasn't been, there hasn't been any additional officers to the 143 full-time equivalents that we've been authorized for.
Okay, that's good. I mean, there was a mention in the report that we got on police that, it aligns with the wage escalation policy, but it's my understanding, I think it still stands that the police are not actually aligned with the wage escalation policy. So if we have a decline in tax-based growth, they're not going to follow suit with that. Is that right? I'm right in assuming that, aren't I?
Mr. Levine, are you on to be able to answer that?
Yes, through you, Chair, to the member of council. Yeah, so the previous year's budget wouldn't reflect the full wage escalation. We don't typically budget collective agreements or when we're negotiating directly into wage and benefits lines. So, it was ongoing for the last several years. So it wouldn't fully reflect that. But based on wage escalation, and if it did reflect, their budget reflected the full wage escalation, they would be within their envelope. It's just when you look at the 22 versus the 23, you're not going to see their full wage escalation budget built in there for 2022 and previous years.
Yeah, but I don't think.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a reminder, Councillor Redwin, the wage escalation policy is to the budget line, not to specific sections of the budget or contractual agreements, unless a bargaining unit agrees to it. But it really is the budget policy, and so what we can say right now is our responsibility is finance. Everything we've been given is that our budget on the whole complies, and individual units comply with the wage escalation policy.
And I only have one question for staff, Chair, really. I've asked a lot of questions beforehand. With $20 million increasing since our restructuring in 2021, with our operational budget going up this much, over the long term, is this sustainable? Like, I know there's casual positions in there. So, I mean, obviously those positions don't have to be reinstated, but are we going to be able to continue with the services that are permanent in the future, even if we have a decline in growth?
Yeah, I think it is. We're managing it very closely. So first and foremost, that's the power of your wage escalation policy. One of the reasons we fell into structural deficits in the past is we had wages escalating beyond tax-based growth or tax revenues we were brought in. Well, the policy, now that we're in compliance with it year after year after year, and we monitor that, the budgets for wages and benefits cannot exceed what we can afford. That's the power of that policy. So that's a big difference with respect to operating expenditures that we didn't have in the past. Second, I'd say we've invested a lot more in debt management, capital from operating, reserve type investments in the last couple of years that we haven't done in in the distance past. So that's actually going to set us up to be more sustainable. And I think the increase in expenditure growth on service levels has been very managed, as you can tell by the presentation this afternoon. And if you can ask any of the commissioners that are present as well to speak on it, but it is a very managed approach using strategies, strategic plans, long-term plans. So we feel what we have before you is a sustainable budget recommendation.
Yeah, I have some concerns. I mean, if you see public safety just going up by 3.4 million, and some of that is not wages, but much of it is, you know, it makes me think, is it sustainable? I don't want to see us losing, having to lay people off later on. So I have comments later on if, you know, if you want.
Yeah, we're still at questions, Councillor, but thank you. Are there any, oh, sorry, Mr. City Manager, I see your hand, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, just 2 points to the councillor and to all of committee. First of all, when we speak about whether or not the police, and for that matter, the fire collective agreement fits within the wage escalation policy, what has been briefed to the council in the past is that it does over the duration or the length of the collective agreement. The way the collective agreements are structured, in some years they may be slightly above, but overall, when you do the calculation over the length of the agreement, then yes, we do believe it fits within wage escalation. Now, there are assumptions in there on growth, but the assumptions are conservative. That's point 1. Point 2 on your question of is just sustainable. I think it goes back to talking a little bit about what I call the magic number. Broadly speaking, very generally speaking, a 3% growth rate allows the City of St. John to retain its services without having to make major changes. And the reason we use that 3% number is the CFO mentioned it. First of all, the wage escalation policy that keeps 57% of our budget in check. And that's an important aspect. But generally speaking, based on past experiences and our understanding of where pressures are, if we achieve a 3% growth rate, we're okay. Now, that magic number may actually go up a bit. We may need a bit more than that if inflation in Canada does not get under check somehow. But generally speaking, we're talking 3%. If our growth rates start to fall below 3% again for any lengthy period of time, then we will have to have discussions in terms of future budgets with Finance Committee about how to deal with that, because then corrections will be required. Those corrections can take several forms. Perhaps there's a bit of a belt tightening exercise on services. Perhaps there is a revisit of the tax rate to deal with the lower growth rate. All of those options, the good news is all of those options will be available to the council of the day, should that ever happen, because of the disciplined approach that we have taken towards the long-term financial plan. So that's a bit more meat in the sandwich, if you will, in terms of the CFO's assertion that this is a sustainable budget, because even if growth rate does go down, there will be options available to council. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. City Manager. And to Councillor Hickey, I wish he didn't ask the question about 2009. Other things keep popping into my head. We had no reserves. Tucker Park and Fleet Reserve, I think was it. And so we're much more protected and less risky because of the work that's been done with reserves. Anyway, I will finish up the question portion and entertain a motion if a member of committee would like to make a motion with regards to the budget. Your Worship.
There are 4 recommendations in the kit, and I will move all of those recommendations.
There's actually 6.
6. Okay, wait a minute. I've got the bullets there.
I went to the bottom of the presentation.
Oh, okay. Hang on here. I shall get to the bottom. All right, well, I will move all 6 of the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Norton. Here we go. On the question, now we are open to debating the motion. Councillor Radwin, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments, Chair. Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say it is refreshing to be able to have a question about where to put money instead of of, what needs to go in a hopper and out of a hopper, like you guys did at the last council meetings. It was awful. And everybody looks stressed. But, I just want to say hats off to CFO Fudge and his team, because they've done a great job of having a really good balanced budget, following financial policies and all of that. It's wonderful. There's some really great things in here. There's reserves in place, all of those wonderful things you want to see. We're managing our debt, all of that. I do think that there's a lot of councillors that want to have a deeper dive into the budget. And, I think it's important for us to have those conversations. I really kept thinking, okay, this competitive advantage, what is our competitive advantage or disadvantage over Moncton and Fredericton? Is the tax rate the driver for people to be making these investments in these large buildings? It's certainly part of the pie, I think. However, when I think about if I was a developer and I was looking at Moncton or St. John, there's still units to rent in Moncton. There's hardly anything here to rent in St. John. So I think the demand is going to drive development. So I think that's that sort of conversation as to, how can we make those strategic investments to be more growth ready, so that in the end, maybe our tax-based growth is going to increase and we can reduce the tax rate by even more. I'm not saying I don't want to reduce the taxes. I think we should. But to that amount, I'm not sure that we need to do that. So I actually am going to vote against it for now. Hoping for us to have that deeper discussion about where to move the money to. But I'll be honest, like this is a really great balanced budget, following all the policies, exactly what we asked staff to do, and it's a good recommendation. It's a bit of a safe way to go. What I don't want to see is that in 3 or 5 years that we're trying to put up the tax rate as well, because we want to make certain investments to be more competitive with Moncton and Fredericton. We have an opportunity to possibly do it now. So I think we need to have that conversation. But I think staff, it's a very balanced approach. And, it's great to see that we're being very responsible with our money.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other members of committee want to make a comment on the motion? Councillor Hickey?
Thanks, Chair. A couple comments. I think what this budget speaks to is a lot of the acts and a lot of the intention of our long-term financial plan coming to fruition, whether that be, the days of hoppers and reserve spending changing and shifting a little bit. And I think this budget will define how this council decides to act on many issues, especially when it comes to new spending and how we work within that. I think it also shows some clear flaws in our industrial tax classes, both non-residential and the industrial one. I think it shows that residents in this city are unfairly bearing a burden, a tax burden that our industrial partners are not. And I think that continues to be relevant, and I think needs to be part of our ask to the province. And as we ask the province to make those adjustments and to spend more money in St. John, I think it in turn says, that this council is also investing in the city. We're seeing significant service adjustments happening here. We're seeing significant investments being made in new efforts. I think specific to the community services reserve. And I think, overall, if the biggest thing for me, I think, is the fork in the road that we're coming to when it comes to housing. We have a massive need in this community. 130 people will sleep on the street tonight in -2 that don't have a place to turn to. And it is the province's job to pick that up and to make sure that the proper investments are being made in housing. And I think the cities are becoming increasingly responsible to take on a coordinating role in that effort. Coordinating whether it's specific project asks or clear outlines as to what housing looks like. I would like to see in this budget more urgency around that. I think that would be the biggest thing from my perspective, and I look forward to that conversation being had a little more holistically once this gets to council. But I think with the level of new spending we're seeing here, it shows a significant tide changing in this city, and especially when you're seeing service levels restored in things like grass cutting, and service levels restored in efforts of beautification and efforts around vacant and dilapidated buildings being enhanced, whether that's through the community reserves or otherwise. We're seeing that reinvestment in the community that I know a lot of, certainly me, but I know a lot of us around the table have seen that community call out for more effort in these areas. And I think we're responding to that because we recognize the level of impact those efforts have, right? And how we want to build a community that's not only good looking, but also supports everyone in their community, no matter where they stand. And I think that relates back to our efforts on housing. So I look forward to the discussion further. Once we get to council, be able to have it more holistically and get that perspective from certainly from other councillors, whether it be on growth or otherwise. But I think we've done a good job of coming together on a lot of solid investments for the city, and then in turn reflecting what a average 12% property assessments have done to a lot of folks in the city as well.
Thank you. Councillor Hickey, if I might ask a follow-up question, sort of put you on the spot. You mentioned urgency around our housing investment. I think CFO Fudge can correct me. There's about $2.3 million available for that urgent response. Were you looking at more of a framework around that? Were you looking for a bigger envelope? Sorry, just urgency.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, personally, I'd be in favor of a bigger envelope in there. I mean, the town of St. Andrews is spending $2 million on affordable housing. Okay. Right. I mean, we're matching it to, if you put $2.4 million directly into unit builds right now, it would build 10 units. Okay. It's not, but I think it relates to a more holistic conversation about what municipalities are going to have to step in and do on housing. It's new for us. We're not experts in that field by any means, and we're getting downloaded a lot of these issues on by the province, and I think it speaks to that coordinator role that I think we will need to step into.
No, thank you for that. That helps me. Your worship, Councillor Norton. Councillor Norton, go ahead.
Thank you. I see the city manager has his hand up, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I was hoping to roll through the committee and then
you got it. Okay,
then he can catch us all at once.
Yeah, no, can certainly appreciate that. For me, it hits the areas we're responsible for. We all know them: city roads, police and fire services, at public safety, drinking water, the transit, zoning and land use. I mean, at the end of the day, that's one of the things that we were created for, is for land use. How do we use land and the zoning for that? Recreation, huge investment in recreation. Setting money aside for that catalytic project is big, and we even see increases in recreation. Garbage, compost, and recycling. I appreciate the continued debate around housing. I get it. It's something that isn't going away, but it's something that's always been here. It looks different than it has. And before, where it may not have been as visible and it may have been hidden, now it's right before us. And but with that, I'm not going to get into comparing apples and oranges as it relates with the town of St. Andrews, or whether it's the city of St. John, as some of our pressure points, some of our demands, and where we're stretched may not directly align with places like the town of St. Andrews. We have a municipal police force. They contract out. We have more recreation. They perhaps have less. So there's ebbs and flows as it relates to that comparison. For only 8 cents on the dollar that we have to spend, for me, I think staff has done a great job. And where one of the things I'm always doing is looking at where we were and where we are and where we're going. And where we are today compared to where we were is light years ahead with this new budget. It's one that I'm supporting. Happy to have the conversation, but encouraging counselors to get behind it. Like any good negotiation, it is there's going to be things that we're going to be satisfied with. There's going to be things that we're maybe not so happy with. But that I guess that pull and tug in this one is here. There's things that certainly I would like to see more of, things I would see less of, but kudos to staff for presenting a great budget that I think hits for me a lot of the boxes that at least the folks that I represent are looking for. We last piece, there's things that we need to strengthen, and how we strengthen those, I think, are conversations, not just necessarily like where we invest, but maybe who we invest with. For example, looking at new construction and tax-based growth. How do we get a better handle on that? Better ideas around revenue generation. We've already heard from Chief Bruce as it relates to e-ticketing, conversations like that. But there's new opportunities and new investments that have been opened as a result of this budget, and we've heard some of those from our Chief of Police this evening, and from staff. So for me, I'm excited to see this one get going. And at least from the folks that I've chatted with, it's this is a good budget that's moving us in the right direction. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Your Worship.
Thank you, Chair. I like this budget as well. Part of what I like about it is that it's based on our strategic priorities, which we are the architects of, our strategic plan. We are the architects of our principles, policies, long-term financial plan, and the 10 financial specifically policies that we are also the architect of. It says right in the kit that there's been all departments have made a contribution to the budget of voicing where they think some of the money should go. So I like that inclusiveness, that it's coming right from the grassroots, from the staff level. I guess, Councillor Radwan mentioned about the hopper exercise and that being uncomfortable, and that was. And I always find a budget a little bit uncomfortable too, because I'm never going to have a budget that completely suits me. And I know that, as Councillor Norton mentioned, there's a little bit of give and there's a little bit of take with all that. So I think this is a great, well-balanced budget. And I am very supportive of the property tax decrease, because at the end of the day, it's the property tax payers that's the only way we generate money. And so they're paying your bills. And so I think that they need a little bit of recognition as well, because as we can see from the budget, really the increases have been on the backs of residential. And as I always like to remind everyone, we keep 100% of residential property tax we collect, but only just over 50%, about 55% of business, commercial, and industry. So that's where, they had the highest, they will pay at the end of the day. There'll be more funds collected from residential. So I just think that I want to give the residentials, I want to recognize them as well. And I think we can do it now. 1 cent, I believe, in the tax rate equals about $875,000. If we do the 9 cents, then we have that little bit of flexibility. And if over the next year, 2 years, whatever, we need to go up a cent or whatever, we have that flexibility there. So I'm happy with this. I'll be supporting the budget tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'll give my comments on the first round. We'll hear from the city manager, and then if any of the committee want a second round of conversation, we will go around again. We have the highest tax rate in the province. I hate saying that. We got so many good things going on in the city of St. John, but maybe we need to be reminded that certainly when it comes to being competitive, is it about the exact numbers? I don't think so. But it's certainly, you know, I would really like that to no longer be part of the conversation in New Brunswick. To be able to point to the city of St. John and say the city of St. John is the highest tax rate in the province. Now, does that mean we should be doing everything to reduce our tax rate? I don't think so. But for anybody who's listening, a 9-cent reduction in the tax rate because of the assessment still means that residential taxpayers in the city of St. John are going to pay 6.3% more in their taxes next year. And that's not just individual homeowners, but that's landlords. So, you know, in the housing crisis and concern that we have for folks with affordable housing, I certainly don't want to be putting more pressure on landlords to squeeze their profit margins and pass those along to their residents. So a 9-cent tax reduction is still a 6.3% residential tax increase. Councillor Norton, I was thinking along the same lines, you know, if everybody's not happy a little bit, we've probably found the balance point in a budget. When I first saw our budget, and it really wasn't related to tax rate, I saw a 7% budget increase and thought, wow, that's a lot. And the 6.3% pressure on residential taxes, not tax rate, but residential taxes, and it's got me concerned. CFO Fudge talked me down when he said, well, we've got these plans, right? We've got plans that we've gone through. We've got a strategic plan that's been at the time draft, but now vetted through council with community members on the committee, vetted through the community and all these other plans that we need to make sure we're moving forward on, while also following our financial plan. And I agree. Everything we've got in the budget is supported by a plan that's been vetted and thought out and gone through a very rigorous process. So it makes sense that we follow them. You know, I've mentioned this before, but you know, Debbie Armstrong, my prof from UNBSJ of many, many years ago in business, talked about the marketing mix of product, price, place, promotion, and now people, the 5 Ps of marketing. And price perception is certainly one of them. And I think it's not only mentioned in our financial plan, but it's mentioned in our long-term strategic plan. And again, it's not the be all and end all, but it is important. Now, that all being said, if there is something that is in one of our plans that needs to be funded and we're not funding it, and is urgent, I would suggest to committee and to council, then the conversation should be, you know, can we get some more funds for this? I will say that part of the conversation with regards to the urgency around housing strategies, there were some council members who were suggesting that it should be tax rate to help fund it. And really, our staff is fantastic. You know, staff came back and said, well, no, if we're looking to give them some funds for this plan that is still being developed, it doesn't have to be tax rate. We have some room because of our fiscal prudence in the operational reserve that could help support that when the plan is developed. So, you know, the questions should be around plans and what's being funded, what's not being funded. And then we need to lean on the expertise of our staff to kind of help us move forward with it. Management has often said, you know, give us the what and we'll figure out the how. And I think that's part of it. There is $2.4 million right now accessible for our growth committee and for the affordable housing strategy, including a staff person to dedicate full time to get in there and hit the ground on it. So I think those funds are there. I agree entirely with Councillor Hickey with regards to how much is being downloaded on municipalities, how much responsibility are we taking on, that constitutionally had a good lesson in the presentation tonight, are not the responsibility of municipalities. And I go back and forth on this because, you know, strictly speaking, housing is not a municipal responsibility. Land use planning is, but housing is not. However, the investments St. John has made in priority neighborhoods since around 2010, so at least for a decade or more, could be said to be social investment that really is also not a municipal priority, but it became a St. John priority. So we have to be careful with our social investments that may or may not be officially responsibilities of the city of St. John. But I do think, you know, we are the level of government that's closest to the people. Do we need to be investing money in what we think are priorities in order to support our residents? We do need to be investing funds, planned with prudence and in context of everything else that we're doing, which is what the budget process is for. But to Councillor Hickey's point, I'm looking forward to part of the discussion when we have recommended to council to send a letter to the province talking about the top end of that slider. I really do appreciate that the province has a couple of tax classes now and a mechanism for municipalities to move into that tax room. And I don't know if they anticipate it or not, but I think the math we have shown here in our budget process shows that we can't take advantage of all of that tax room they gave us. So if they were to move or remove the top end of that slider to allow us to get into all of that tax room and to bring some more equity between the tax classes, that would certainly be appreciated. Those will be the end of my first round comments. We'll go to our city manager, and then we'll be in for round two. Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Chair, what I was hoping to do, but a lot of it has already been touched on, is just to reemphasize a little bit the overall reasoning of the staff when it came to two of the most topical items, one being the tax rate and one being affordable housing. First of all, on the tax rate, just to be clear, and the CFO did mention this, it's not, and Mr. Chair, you mentioned it in detail. We are recommending the tax rate reduction, not just for the competitive advantage of it, although that's clearly a component. It is also taking a look at the tax burden that is on our residents and our apartment owners and the like, and the fact that their overall burden, even with a 9-cent tax rate reduction, is still going up in the coming year. So that did weigh heavily on our recommendations in that regard. On affordable housing, the staff does not question at all the assertion that we have a crisis in St. John that needs to be addressed. Absolutely, we do. It's a question of how we address that crisis. And the responsibility for funding clearly resides at the provincial level. What we have within this budget and within the Affordable Housing Action Plan, which should be guiding our budget deliberations, is an approach whereby we do what we can, but more importantly, we advocate so that others do their responsibilities as well. So for example, within the Affordable Housing Action Plan, we talk about the notion of considering moving forward municipal lands for free for not-for-profit organizations that build affordable housing and advocating that the province do the same. We talk about accelerated tax sales because there's tremendous discounts on properties should we get into accelerated tax sales, etc. We do champion a municipal housing entity to help drive and go after funds. And in the interim, until that is stood up, we have a coordinator and we have a growth team that will be fully dedicated to submitting projects within the various financial streams that are coming on. So ours is really, the approach we're taking is one of leadership and advocacy work and coordination work and making sure that that is appropriately funded. Direct funding to projects, and Councillor Hickey mentioned it, and of course, we welcome the discussion of council. But if you were to arguably put $1 million into direct funding, that buys you at $150,000 a door, that buys you 6 affordable housing units. That's just not where our money is best spent. Our money at the municipal level should be spent, in our view as staff, on that leadership and advocacy role and alignment role and coordination roles. And where the big money is, they should be taking a look at the direct funding. So that's a bit of our rationale behind where we have put the money for affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Round 2, Councillor Radwin.
Thank you so much, Chair. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understand exactly how I looked at the budget. I looked at it from 2 components. So the first one was how do we maintain our services and have our service levels at acceptable levels. So in looking at each budget line item, it looked like we were either maintaining or sometimes enhancing services for the most part. And for the areas like dilapidated buildings and such, there is other sections of money that could be infused in that if staff feel that's what's needed. The other way that I looked at this budget was how can we help the most vulnerable? Because the community is struggling, and this is a global issue. We are getting close to a recession. Inflation, prices, interest rates, all of such are causing a lot of problems for people. Obviously, the taxpayer has been footing the bill for a very long time, and it would be nice to be able to give them some tax relief, because now that assessments, which are completely out of our control, as we know, have gone through the roof, they're still going to have that 10% that they're going to have to pay because the province caps the percentage increase up to 10%. But what does this mean for a homeowner? So if you own a property which is worth $250,000, it means you're going to save $225 a year if you go from 1.71 to 1.62. Now, I would argue that that's not the most vulnerable people sitting in a property worth $250K or more. I would probably argue maybe somebody sitting in a $150,000 home is maybe where you would have some people that are struggling a little bit more, and they would save $135 a month. So that's basically a McDonald's meal every month. Is that going to help them a lot? I would probably argue probably not. The other most vulnerable people, of course, are people who live in apartments, not apartment owners. So I would be worried about them as well. I am not convinced that by us lowering the tax rate that the landlords, and some will, but because we not to say we don't have good landlords, there are some very good landlords out there, but are they going to lower their rents? Probably not. The other thing is we have to keep in mind right now that we have a lot of immigrants coming in, and the demand is going to be there to build housing, because I don't know, I think I mentioned at the last meeting, we have a lot of people from Ukraine and Afghanistan that are living either in people's homes being hosted by lovely St. Johners, or they're being housed in hotels. So there is a great argument there to be made that the federal government especially needs to probably unload some of this money for housing onto the municipality. Now, when we were at the FCM, there was 4 of us that went for the FCM conference. It was totally out there that it doesn't matter whether you like it or not, the municipalities are going to be taking on housing. Now, I agree with the city manager, though, obviously, that's not something that we've been budgeted for in the past. So if they're going to unload this onto the municipality, I agree, money needs to come with it. I'm comfortable with us using some of our funds, as it's been suggested, to create that value proposition of what the city can do if they unload this money onto us. But, I am with the city manager there. I think that we do need to get the funds from the other 2 levels of government. It is the province's and federal government's responsibility to do that. But just keep in mind those amounts. $150,000 home, when we drop the tax rate by 9 cents, they save $135 a year, essentially about $10 a month. So, you know, are we, I mean, it's helping the tax burden, absolutely, because there is a tax burden that's been put onto them, but how much? Are we really helping that much? Could we better help the community by doing something to drive the tax base so that we could lower that property tax even more significant than that? So that's kind of my question, and I do think we need that deeper dive, but thank you, Chair, for allowing my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Redmond. Councillor Hickey.
Thanks very much, Chair. Appreciate the conversation, and I think it speaks to the realities a lot of St. Johners are facing. And beyond that, you know, I don't want it to overshadow the massive wins that are in this budget. Whether that be restoration of our, you know, the one of the huge ones for me is restoration of our of whether it's our mowing service, our beautification services, that stuff, that will be massive for this community. I also don't want the narrative to be that tax reductions will support renters by any means. There is no evidence anywhere that lowered property taxes support renters by any means, of which are 50% of the people who live in the city. 50% of the people who live in St. John are renters. You look at our outlying neighborhoods, it's 80 to 20. 80% own, 20% rent. There's massive discrepancies between the outlying areas and what St. Johners are made up of, and the majority. Well, it's split. It's 50-50, 50% being renters, and lower tax rates don't support them. What support those folks are bigger investments in our community centers. Are bigger investments that the social services that this city does own. That's what has impacts on that's what has an impact on the lives of the folks that need it. In particular, those folks living in poverty, which are more often than not renters, in which my ward make up 35%. So any opportunities we have to do so, which is why I'll continue to push to see a larger increase in that community services reserve, whether it comes from our operating reserve or whether it comes from not as large of a tax decrease. I'm not sure what it is. Happy to support the budget as is, but we'll continue to push to see that change happen, because I think it is important. But also we want to continue to recognize the wins that are in here. You know, whether it's in our infrastructure investments, all that stuff, it's all good to see. I just think there's a bit more that we can do because of this position, and especially as we face the economic uncertainty, which is certainly impactful to this city, but I would argue more impactful to the people living in it. So any opportunity we have to support them, I think, is one that we need to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Your Worship, your hand went up, your hand went down.
I think I'm fine, actually, Chair.
Okay, fair.
Thank you.
Councillor Norton, are you good? Awesome. My second round will be short. It is really good to have the discussion. You know, assessments are up in St. John. You know, it wasn't in this slide deck, but the residential assessments are very strong in St. John, and pat ourselves in the back a little bit. Our residential increases are slightly higher than our surrounding communities. I mean, people are choosing to come to live and work in St. John. Maybe not for the budget discussion, but where's an opportunity to get some more revenue to support the things we want to support? It's in a 3.2% non-residential and industrial assessment growth rate, which compares to 10% in Fredericton and Moncton. So, you know, post-budget, I hope we as council have conversations with our growth partners. I can't remember, sorry, who mentioned that, you know, our vacancy rate in St. John is really, really small, and it is for residential. People want to move and live here. It is very large on the commercial side. We need to get effort to fill those spaces so that it makes the same pressure commercially and industrially that it does residentially, so that everybody in St. John can benefit, because there is that inequity now. And a couple of years ago, it may have been under Chair Merithew's direction at Finance Committee, but I do remember having a discussion around the point, and we actually said, and this was when things weren't going so well, we were talking about how important it is to follow plans when things aren't going well. But somebody mentioned at the time, maybe it was me, but that we need to remember how important it is to follow plans when things are going well. And I would just put that out there, that if there's an urgency, it's an urgency to get that next plan developed so that we can follow it and make sure what we are doing is appropriate and responsible and not just a quick reaction. Because that's the change. And I will bring it back to kind of where we started, because Councillor Hickey got me started on it, because we are so far better in how we do things now than we did in 2009. And just before I call for the vote, I will thank all of committee for this discussion. Councillor Norton, you have told me many, many times over the years, it's really important to be hard on the issues and not on the people. And I think our debate and discussion at this Finance Committee was exactly that. So with that, I will call for a vote on the motion of the recommendations that are before us. Those in favor signify by saying aye or raise your hand. Those opposed? Councillor Radwin, respectfully opposed. Thank you. And the recommendation is passed. Thanks, CFO Fudge, if you're still with us. Hope we didn't wear you out. Let's move on to 6.3. Another big win that only slightly mentioned in the budget, but going to get some support maybe after we're done tonight. 6.3 is the internal audit. CFO Fudge, please introduce.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. City's Director of Finance and Internal Audit, Jody Forgy, has undertaken an internal audit on the city's health and safety program. Focus of the audit was to look at the design and structure of the city's program relative to best practices and to make recommendations. This was a significant amount of work that also included significant efforts from our health and safety and wellness manager, Corey Curnew, under the leadership of our Commissioner of Human Resources, Stephanie Hossack. So with that, as a brief introduction, I'll turn the floor over to Director Forgy.
Okay, thank you, CFO Fudge. All right, so the internal audit of health and safety. Good evening, Chair Sullivan and members of Finance Committee. This presentation provides an overview of the work performed, and it was part of our 2022 approved internal audit plan. The city recognizes the importance of keeping the workforce safe on the job and values the importance of ensuring that the health and safety program always looks to get better. The review included key categories in health and safety, such as governance, activities, tools, systems, applicable policies and procedures, communication, training programs, and incident management process and systems. So just to give you a quick background on the city's health and safety program, we have an operational model that they refer to as a hybrid model. So that you can either have a centralized or a decentralized model. So a centralized model is more where you have a health and safety team at the corporate level, and they execute on all things health and safety. As CFO Fudge mentioned, we had significant help on this audit from Corey Curnew. He is the person at the centralized level, so it's one individual there. So we heavily rely on the decentralized model as well, which is responsibility within the different areas of the city. So they administer all the program requirements. In saying that, they still reach out at the corporate level if they need help in kind of developing their own individual SOPs, or if they need help with incident investigation and reporting. So that's the current model we have here at the city. Also, the current program is based off of WorkSafe MB's approach, and this approach lays out 5 key focus areas and 22 supporting focus areas. And since the implementation of this model, there has been advancements in frameworks. We know with health and safety, it's always evolving. So there are leading industry standards discussed further in this presentation. And as a whole, the corporate H&S program is paper-based records management system, and it doesn't use a digitally enabled solution. And so it requires many hours of administrative input to manage records, compile and analyze basic reports, and track the employee training. And finally, the overall stakeholder buy-in and engagement to the program and its effectiveness is varied across the organization due to inconsistencies in H&S knowledge, resistance to change ways of working, and responsiveness to management efforts. So before I get into the recommendations, I wanted to throw a picture in there. So the journey continues. So I did have a lot of positive interactions with the city staff and management. It was evident they cared a lot about the health and safety and the wellness of the employees. And it really rang true to me when we kind of delivered this audit report. And the audit report had quite a bit of recommendations in it. And one thing the health and safety manager said, and I'm going to quote him now, not to embarrass him, but he said, he took it and he said, "We are on our health and safety journey. And this is a significant step forward in that journey. With health and safety being a core value, it is always a priority." And after he said that, it made a lot of sense to me because it's not a one and done deal. The road has no destination. There's going to be continuous process improvements and ways to look to be safer. So a quick summary, because as part of my role to Finance Committee, I'm supposed to report on the status of the audit. So it was complete on time. Happy to say it was within budget. And the plan is that all the recommendations will be completed in 2023 and 2024. There were a total of 12. Half of them were medium risks and then half were low. And also very happy to report there was no high level risk, which require immediate actions. So getting into the recommendations, they're also categorized by those 4 buckets I mentioned earlier. So corporate governance in relation to health and safety is crucial as it ensures that the city has a safe work environment for its employees, contractors, and other stakeholders. The city takes this role seriously. The first item that will be actioned will be to update the strategy and objectives in order to help understand all the future program adjustments and to assist in the framework changes. So as I stated earlier, the city currently uses the WorkSafe MB model, and they're going to enhance the program by moving to a globally recognized ISO 45001 framework. This will help ensure that we are keeping up with all the key elements that can be expected and are recognized globally. So once we've established our strategy, objectives, and framework, we'll then look at revisiting our operating model, determine if there's changes to be made, and then update our roles and responsibilities. So within the category of process, there are basic elements that need to be included in every health and safety program, and those are, a lot of them are guided by the WorkSafe MB. But it's also important for organizations to customize their programs to their needs and familiarize themselves with the process. So there are process changes which can enhance the city's program. The hazard identification and risk assessment updates will provide an opportunity to create an inventory of all the tasks, jobs, and risk ranking matrix, among other benefits. The updates to the hazard which is the hire process, will help equip employees with the ability to identify risks and provide the technique to manage those risks. And then there's also an incident management process at the city as well, but it could also be formalized in order to provide a streamlined approach that is more effective and efficient. The corporate health and safety manager does work very closely with the various departments when an incident is reported. But when there's a more structured process, which includes more details on the root cause analysis, type of incident severity, to name a few areas, it will assist in building this process so that incidents help provide corrective and preventable actions. In addition, there's an opportunity for us to develop a management of change process. So this is when you consider the resource allocations related to health and safety when there's a significant proposed organization change. So it's literally embedding it into our values. So it's a thought when we go to change something within the organization. And then the last two areas are more around the journey, as we mentioned earlier, in monitoring how the program is doing and looking for ways to improve on an ongoing basis. Our program is paper-based for the most part, and there are opportunities to leverage digital tools. There are many tools out there available, but of course, with any change in data design, there's always a financial cost in doing this. So in order to make sure we make the right decisions and meet our needs, the best way we'll do it is to first get important insights. So we'll look at the review of the data design to figure out what it is we need to know, how quickly we need to know it, and what level of detail we want as an organization. And another key important factor is how easy is it for the people to input, because this goes right from the front line all the way up to management in leveraging these tools. So once we figure out what that is, then we will kind of pivot to what is the best solution for us. So around people, communication, and training, one of the big things that we'll be doing is conducting regular safety culture surveys. So this is important because it focuses on specific areas of improvement. When you receive feedback from employees, listening to the frontline workers is a great way to continue to improve the safety program. They're our first line of defense, really, with any health and safety initiatives. Excuse me. And then the current comprehensive learning management system should be updated to include all key learning activities and requirements for jobs and employees to assist going forward on easily navigating what is outstanding, who can perform what jobs, and to easy pivot moving people from place to place. So with communication, the city does perform tailgate talks, weekly safety meetings, and other good forms of communication on safety, but could use improvements on formalizing the what and how is communicated during these various initiatives. Part of the communications will be to assist in breaking habits that may not contribute to a successful program. Through these communications, the city will be able to continue that narrative. And one thing I have learned for sure is you can't order people to change their behavior. So overall, there are no high-risk areas found for the city's health and safety program, but there are important changes that can be made to enhance it. Health and safety, of course, at its core, and I don't even need to mention this, but I'm going to anyway, is that we want everyone to go home safe. But beyond this hugely important role lies financial and legal implications to ensure the health and safety programs are effective. And then, of course, we also have our morale of our employees and our reputation. So some of the value we'll see from implementing the recommendations should be a decrease in injuries at work and lost time, a process that will assist with administrative time, consistency, and managing of costs. And lastly, the city will be in a better position to measure performance and continue to improve. So for internal audits, next steps, we'll be following up on the management action items and reporting back to you and the Finance Committee on the status of completion. All of these, as mentioned earlier, will be done over the course of 2 years. And that's largely because we do have a small team there and we want to make sure we're realistic, but also we want to make sure that we're addressing the medium risk items in a more earlier time frame. And then when it comes to figuring out the resource requirements and the budgets, we've looked at this at a high level and can see certain areas where we'll leverage, or it would be beneficial to leverage third parties. So of course we'll need a budget for that. So we'll be looking into that as we progress through these action items. And then in 2024, so the second year is when we would look at what is the tool or the solution that we would use, because that would be where the potential higher budget requirements would lay. So in with this presentation, the Finance Committee report does say it's a receive and file for this. And I do kind of want to elaborate on my thank you at this point. I just want to thank council for implementing internal audit at the city and for finance committee listening and providing their advice and being engaged in the process. I also want to thank the city staff specifically on this internal audit and also the third-party consultants. I would like to claim that I'm a health and safety expert, but I certainly am not. So we did have national safety, health, and occupational leaders that assisted us through this process. So it's always really great to learn about what the organization is doing, and I just thank you for your time.
Thanks, Director Forgy. Questions, comments from committee? Your worship, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to also thank the team as well for this. I think it's important part of our structure of evaluating ourselves as we go forward. We can't improve if we don't evaluate ourselves, so I'm happy it's there. It's a great job and interesting data you've got there, so it's really good, and really appreciate all the effort to get it to us, I guess. So thanks so much, Jody.
Thanks, Your Worship. Anybody else on committee? Seeing none. I do have a question just before we go to the city manager. Director Forgy, what kind of challenge is it within our organization, perhaps in development of the tool? We have such a diverse organization and people and task. Like, is the tool that gets developed, will it be one that will be used throughout the organization, or does it need to be tweaked depending on the operation and task?
Yes, that's a great question. It would definitely need to be tweaked, and that's back to the operating model and why it actually makes sense. Because like you mentioned, we have a diverse workforce. It makes sense that we have the hybrid model. So it helps with having kind of a central corporate ownership so that we have a streamlined approach and someone to reach out to, consistency, but then within each level or each operational area, they create their own specialized standard operating procedures. They create their own templates with assistance from that central location. So that's why the hybrid model makes a lot of sense to us. If we tried to cover having someone like Corey for the everywhere in the city, you'd need a team of, quite a bit more than one individual to pull that off. So, and then also within those areas, they'll also get assistance from third parties when it's a very specialized SOP. So the tool would definitely be specific to the areas as well.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager.
Just on that last question, first of all, Chair, the timing of this is actually pretty gosh darn perfect, because Finance Committee will recall that we are also undertaking a major effort for a new ERP, an enterprise resource planning module, to control all of the various software tools that we use. So there will be potential here to try to integrate this within our new ERP, and there would be tremendous advantage in doing that. And I just throw that as a side comment. My concluding comment on this one would be that clearly safety needs to be the priority. Not only because it is the right thing to do, it clearly is the right thing to do, and every manager and every employee has a responsibility towards safety. But on top of that, there are very clear legislative, the law requirements for us to follow when it comes towards safety. So we do need to be conscious of that as we move forward. And as we've seen in recent WorkSafe New Brunswick and other provincial jurisdictions, they hold corporations to account if corporations do not do what is expected of them. But the third aspect is probably the most compelling that I would offer to this Finance Committee. That's all about our outcomes and our efficiencies. I spent some time in the nuclear power industry, on the dark side, if you will. But what the nuclear power industry has determined, and they have all the facts and figures to back it up, the organizations that are the most safe are also the organizations that are the most productive and the most efficient. There is a direct correlation between us paying attention to our safety and the outcomes that we can provide. So that is the third reason, if you will, for us to have recommended that this audit occur. to now receive the results of this audit and to put it in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. So for tonight, is a receive and file. Your worship, and Councillor Radwin, on the question, all in favor, aye. Contrary minded? Carried. Thanks again, Director, and soon to your team.
Yes, thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
All right, item 6.4, the year-to-date financial results and year-end projections for the general fund. CFO Fudge.
Yes, thank you very much. This is the last agenda item this evening. Mr. Levine, Craig Levine, our financial controller, is here to present the city's year-to-date results and projections as of the end of October, so 10 months in. Those year-end projections were submitted by each service area who best understand their own results. Mr. Levine will present. He'll attempt to answer your questions. However, if there's more detailed questions that you have, he will call upon the commissioner of the service area. So with that, over to Mr. Levine. Thank you.
Thank you, CFO Fudge, and through you, Mr. Chair, to the members of the Finance Committee. The purpose of this presentation is to provide the committee with a high-level overview of the year-end financial forecast for both the general fund and the utility fund. And as CFO Fudge alluded to, commissioners are here from all service areas to answer any questions that might come from committee members. I also want to highlight the recommendations at the end of this presentation regarding reserve transfers have been included in the reserve report that was included in tonight's consent agenda. Here's a high-level overview of the general fund's revenues and expenses. We anticipate revenues to be approximately $2.253 million better than budget. Expenditures are anticipated to be over budget by $2.248 million. Wages and benefits, as reported throughout the year, are under budget, so I will not touch base on most of the service areas because you will see a surplus in everybody's wages and benefits. And goods and services and other charges are anticipated to be over budget, and I will go through this in more detail throughout the presentation. However, overall, we anticipate for the most part to be on budget. And here is a breakdown of revenues by service area. So property taxes and unconditional grant, just shy of 877,000 overall positive variance, and that's due to the net property taxes related to LNG. And this is the last year for the way LNG has been incorporated in our budget. Moving forward for 2023 and beyond, it's included in our base tax at the beginning of the year. Transfers from operating reserves, CFO Fudge alluded to this earlier tonight, but we are only recommending a transfer of $1.75 million, and that's really to balance the budget and not create any unnecessary surplus. Growth in community service, 887,000 positive variance, and again, the majority of that relates to building permits better than budget, as well as additional accommodation levy revenue. Public Works and Transportation Services, they're just over $2 million positive surplus. Majority of that surplus relates to increase in meter violations, traffic bylaw fines, and various parking lot revenue, as well as an additional $1.38 million in funding under DTI's Municipal Designated Highway Program. Strategic Services is under budget by 636, and again, that's really due to the way we had to budget for LNG, which actually gets coded directly to the property tax and unconditional grant lines. Corporate services, 176,000 under budget, and that's due really to less land sales and industrial parks than anticipated. The next several slides will review each service area's year-end projections. And as you can see for year-end, growth and development is anticipated to end up with a deficit of $662,000. Goods and services variance of $891,000 is mainly due to the accommodation levy expense, which is really a flow through, and the offset is with the additional levy revenues. Market Square is anticipated to be slightly over budget due to costs associated with a new roof. Canada Games Aquatic Center variance is due to the additional COVID funding approved in 2022, and the offset for this expenditure is included as a transfer from operating reserve. Unconditional grants is over budget due to funding committed for the Memorial Cup. And again, the offset for this over expenditure is included in a transfer from the operating reserve revenues. Public Works and Transportation Services is anticipated to have a little over a $2 million negative variance for year end. And again, the overall drivers for the negative variance is the increase in cost of fuel and road salt during the first quarter of the year for snow removal, as well as the additional cost for the municipal designated highway program approved by DTI. However, as I just alluded to, the $1.3 million is coming in as a revenue, so it's really just a wash. And the solid waste management is anticipated to be slightly over budget due to the rollout of the new solid waste program. Public safety overall is anticipated to have a positive variance for year end of just over $235,000. Fire and EMO services, year-end projections to be about $90,000. Again, wages and benefits driving part of that. But they also have a negative variance of $100,000 in their professional fees, and that's due to the fire service review that was approved earlier this year. And again, with this one, the offset in this unbudgeted expenses is coming in from reserve revenue. St. John Police Force and PCC combined, year-end projections about 164,000 positive variance. Again, wages and benefits driving some of that, as well as goods and services is going to be over budget due to some fuel costs being higher than anticipated, insurance costs, and legal fees. And then street lighting has a minor variance. Utilities and infrastructure is anticipated to have a negative variance of just over $410,000 for year end. Carpenter shop is over budget due to increased costs and supplies and less internal billings than budgeted for. Facility management is over budget due to engineering services. However, this overage will be offset from some funding that will cover the cost of this, as well as building maintenance being much higher than what was budgeted for. Strategic services is anticipated to have an overall surplus of $279,000. Again, the minor variances for strategic services relate to information technology, liability insurance being a bit higher than budgeted, as well as assessment charges. But however, the variances are offset with a lot of savings within other departments in this area. Corporate services is anticipated to have a positive variance of just over $631,000. City manager's office, budgeted items for special projects were not utilized. The biggest drivers of these was we included funding for arbitration for both the fire and police, and the good news was we didn't need to go to arbitration on either one of those files, so that's creating a very large surplus under the city manager's office. Industrial parks is over budget due to approval from the strategic plan and for the strategic plan and various other improvements. And again, funding to cover these overages will be from a transfer from the reserves. And then again, most of the service areas have small year-to-date surpluses for all the other services. Other charges anticipate to have a deficit of $290,000. The positive variance in pension will offset the additional $500,000 being transferred to the operating reserve from the St. John Energy benefits, and again, that revenue has been included as well. Next, I'm going to talk about St. John Water, which was projecting an overall surplus for year end of just over $152,000. Overall revenues are anticipated to have a positive variance of just over $556,000. As we mentioned in the budget, the 2023 budget, overall meter billings are continuing to recover and is projected to have actually a little over a $760,000 positive variance that will help offset some of the variance in our flat rate customers. Industrial revenues are anticipated to be under budget by $347,000. I just want to highlight any variances within the industrial revenue or expenses do not impact potable users. Other revenues positive variance is mainly due to a combination of higher interest revenue and property tax transfers. And again, here's just a snapshot of the anticipated expenditures by service area with an overall projected negative variances of just over $400,000. Here's a breakdown for the year-end projections with a positive variance in goods and wages and benefits, and an unfavorable variance in goods and services. So goods and services has just shy of $407,000 negative variance. Drinking water, we anticipate having a positive variance. The biggest driver of that's the treatment plant's expected to be under budget by about $100,000. Industrial water services, $617,000 negative variance. A couple of drivers of that is unplanned emergency repairs at Spruce Lake Raw Water Screen Building. There's an unplanned emergency repairs on the transmission line to Colson Cove, as well as a project to add an additional meter for one of our industrial customers, which is ongoing. This slide shows the breakdown of the year-end projections between our two classes of customers. And as you can see, the majority of the surplus in potable is really due to better than expected revenues. And for this reason, the staff are recommending to transfer part of that potable surplus into capital reserves. The utility, as part of its 2023 operating budget, has budgeted a transfer from reserves to help fund part of the Lancaster Lagoon dredging project, as well as some additional reserves to help offset some large increases being seen in capital tenders. So in conclusion, the projections presented still have risk of changing with challenges in supply chain. Many items are anticipated and have been forecasted to be received. However, receipt of goods may change. The fiscal year still has 2 months of expenses to be incurred. The city is now moving into our winter season, and costs could increase based on the weather. Overall, the good news is revenues are improving in areas that were impacted by COVID, such as parking, our recreation, and our potable revenues for water are improving. And again, as I stated earlier, the surplus in potable water could be largely attributed to better than anticipated revenue. And the recommendation to transfer capital reserve will help with budgeting challenges with the rising costs of our capital projects. So with that, staff are recommending transferring only $1.75 million in the general fund operating reserves instead of the budgeted amount to alleviate risk of a large surplus. Staff are also recommending transferring $750,000 from the utility fund potable operating budget to capital reserves. And with that, recommend Finance Committee receive and file this report as presented and direct any questions to staff.
Thanks, Mr. Levine. Committee, questions for staff? Councillor Radwan, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick one, actually. Through you to the city manager. I see there's a positive variance in your office. That's great, but it mentioned that there was items that were budgeted for that didn't get utilized. Just wondering what they were. Just for my information.
The main value there was the money that we had put aside for the potential binding arbitration that would have occurred for either police and or fire. And the costs associated with that, legal fees, special consultant fees, et cetera, et cetera. And because we achieved a settlement for both police and fire, those fees would not be required.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Redmond. Anybody else from committee? I've got one that's maybe slightly on topic or off topic, but projections. Would it be appropriate, Mr. City Manager? I read some good news on initial results on our WasteWise program, which eventually gets to our budget. Might I ask at first blush if we noticed any change in diversion?
So, Mr. Chair, great question. We have seen diversion. Initial figures are very promising. I hesitate providing any of those initial figures because we are basically less than just approaching the first month of collection results. But indications are promising. We'll have a much better idea by end year, and it is our intention to provide a report out to council at that point in time. But again, it appears that we are achieving what we wanted to do with all of this. It wasn't to make money or anything like that. It was to divert waste from the landfill and it would appear that we are achieving that. Details to follow. Will that have an impact on follow-on budgets? Perhaps. But again, it is just too early to provide any sort of comment on that.
No, fair. I'll take promising. It was really a bit of a segue, since we have our public forum, to do the advertisement, and just a pat on the back for those who are using all 4 bins. That it's good for the environment, but it also will help the landfill last longer. And while it might be budget neutral-ish right now, in the long run, it is so good for the budget if we make that landfill last longer. So keep using all 4 bins, and thanks to the team that's looking after it. So we have 3 recommendations that come with the year-end projections: 2 transfers on reserves, and a receive and file the presentation. Your Worship and Councillor Norton, on the motion, all in favor signify saying aye or raising your hand. Opposed? Carried. Just before we adjourn our 3-hour off Monday meeting, thanks team. Thanks to the committee. Thank you so much to all the staff that hung around. Maybe we should do projections early in the meeting so they don't have to listen to us for 3 hours first. But thank you to all the staff across the department, certainly our financial department. But as we always see, these financial discussions reach across the organization. And just thank you so much to committee for the respectful conversation on topic tonight. Certainly it's a conversation in the community, and it's a really cool conversation to be having in St. John, because St. John is moving forward, and we've got all sorts of things to talk about on because of our fantastic assessment growth. Thank you to St. Johners for hanging in with us. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn. Your Worship, Councillor Norton. Thanks, everybody.